a minute to allow people to log on. Get going in about 60 seconds. Okay, so good afternoon. We'll wait a second here. Usually the number picks up. I guess the notice just went out. What typically happens is as soon as we go live, a notice goes out to our subscribers. It takes a minute or two for them to log in, so we hold off just a minute. If you watch the market today, a good bounce back, but it was a really bad day for me. I made a really bad move. If you're following us on our financial page, I'll update that. I purchased DraftKings yesterday expecting a bounce back. I think DraftKings was the one stock that didn't bounce back, and so I'm sitting on a loss. When you buy a stock and you're holding a loss, we call it holding the bag. It's basically holding an empty bag. You have a big loss on your hands. You have to decide if you cut losses and sell it, or do you hold on? I'm going to hold on with DraftKings. Before we get going, our guest today is Peter Berdon. We'll have him on in a few minutes. He's a member of the Board of Ed. We'll let him give you his background. He's running for re-election. I want to follow up on a few questions that came in yesterday. Hello to Richard and Terrell. How are you? Yesterday, after the discussion about the tax collector, one of the questions came up about the role of Jamie. Jack, I can do that as well. Jack, you follow me personally. It's financial literacy with Steve Mazzacane, but it's on my personal page, but I'll link it on Brantford 7 as well. A question about Jamie Cosgrove. When an official is elected, like the tax collector, they don't respond. They don't really answer to anybody but you. If an elected official, a tax collector, gets elected and decides not to show up for work, not to come in, they can do that. There are very difficult processes to go through to get an elected official out. They don't answer to the first selectman. They don't answer to anybody. And so the first selectman, yes, has oversight of the town, but he can't hire or fire an elected official. So what that person does is on them. And I think technically maybe the state, OPM, maybe over them, the Office of Policy and Management, there may be some line up there, but the first selectman does not have the power to discipline or to enforce anything when it comes to elected officials. And that's one of the problems when you have a position that probably should be hired and have expertise to provide that job. And instead we have it elected. So that's likely a change we'll see in the near future. Okay, we have Peter Berdon. We'll bring him on right now. Peter, how are you? Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Good afternoon, Steve. How are you?
Very good. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well.
And I appreciate you coming on a day that you have a Board of Ed meeting tonight. So you have the next 5-6 hours will be dedicated to education in Brantford.
It's my Brantford day.
That's exactly right. So, okay. So before we begin, and we've had all of the members on, there's no huge surprises in the questions we're asking, and the audience knows what they are. We're trying to get a feel for where you stand on the current Board of Education, the role of the Board of Education, and what comes next, and what's the future of it. Obviously, we've had a fairly contentious 2 years. Part of that has to do with parents. Part of that has to do with a pandemic that no one could have predicted, and no one really had significant experience getting through. But before we begin that, you've been involved in town politics and in town boards for quite some time. Can you give us a background of you professionally, and then also your personal involvement in the town?
Certainly. Well, I am a lifelong resident of the town of Brantford. I was born and raised here. I've gone through the Brantford school system. After being in the Brantford school system, I went to Duke University for college and spent 4 years down in North Carolina. Came up to Hartford to go to law school. I graduated from law school from the University of Connecticut. Lived in New Haven for about a year and a half or so, and then decided to actually move back to Brantford, to my hometown. And I've been here ever since the early 90s. I've chosen to raise my family here and I've lived here in town with my wife and 3 kids. I've served on the RTM. I've served as an assessor for the town of Brantford, and I've also had a previous term on the Board of Education as well.
Okay, you were on the Board of Assessment Appeals too, right?
Correct, the Board of
Yes,
Assessment Appeals. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, your kids are how old?
So I have a sophomore in college. She's up at BC right now. I have a son who's a senior at the Brantford High School, and I have a daughter who is a sophomore at Choate.
Okay, and so they all went through Brantford?
They've all gone through Brantford, yes.
Okay. Okay, all right, so you have been here and you've served both on the RTM and Board of Ed before, which gives you a fairly unique perspective, I think, on both sides of certainly budgeting aspects. But let's talk about Brantford Board of Ed.
Certainly.
In your estimation, and I know there are statutes that say this, but your estimation, what is the realistic goal of the Board of Ed when it comes to interacting with the superintendent and overseeing education?
Like many other boards, the Board of Ed sets the policy. We adopt and approve the budget, and we have direct oversight over the superintendent. And it's through the establishment of the budget and our policies that we are able to provide direction to the school system. The superintendent, he is or she is the chief executive officer of the school system. They're the ones that are charged with implementing the goals and objectives that the board has set and established.
So in your estimation, you have been serving since when in this most recent incarnation?
I've not quite been on a year just yet.
Okay.
It'll be a year this November that I came onto the board. And so it's not quite a year yet. So I haven't been through a full cycle.
So let me ask you this question then. In that year, and you came in the middle of a unique situation, no question, would you say the board is living up to that assignment or their job over last year?
Steve, as you indicated, these have been really, really challenging times. We've all been stretched to our limits, I think. And I think, the board has had some challenges in terms of quite honestly meeting those goals to the level of expectation that I would like to see. And I think, as hopefully things become more normalized, we'll be able to actually, achieve that and to get back into a normal swing of board oversight and, an appropriate guidance to the school system as to where it would like to go in terms of its future direction.
So then talk to me about that. You mentioned what you would like to see. Realistically, going forward, what are some things that you would like to see change based on what we see now?
Well, right now, I think the school system is operating under a somewhat antiquated strategic plan. I think that strategic plan needs to be updated. We need to make sure that we have clear and concrete and attainable goals for the school system to achieve, and goals that can be measured. We need to have some measurements for success for our school system. And having focus on a plan like that helps everybody kind of move in the same direction. So that we can achieve the best results. And at the end of the day, I think everybody's looking to do the same thing, and that is to provide the best educational opportunities for the kids that we possibly can.
Are there specifics in there that you would like to see us work on when it comes to education?
Look, I have some really kind of bold ideas in terms of education. I think our educational system, here in the United States is somewhat antiquated. It's based upon a agrarian economy that no longer exists. We have some of the lowest number of school days out of any developed nation. And I think providing more expanded opportunities for our students, more flexible opportunities for our students in terms of their educational opportunities would be fantastic. Whether or not we're ready to get there yet as a society, I don't know yet. That's something to be seen. But certainly those would be some great opportunities. I will put out there as by way of an example, the summer school program that the school system held. And I realize that we're in a different time now because we're kind of coming off a year long of restrictions due to COVID. But there was a huge amount of involvement and huge energy surrounding the summer school program, particularly for the elementary age kids. And there's something on the neighborhood of 360 kids participated. I mean, that's just an unheard of number. And, quite honestly, the reports that we heard back from the teacher involvement and the teacher excitement in terms of the programs that they were able to develop for the kids is really something that hopefully we can capitalize on.
Now, is that something? Now, I think that has been discussed on a much larger scale than just Brantford. Is that something Brantford has the ability to do without like national or state involvement?
Absolutely, and we're still in the process of needling through what the actual costs of that were, but based upon the reports that we've had today, the costs seem to be relatively modest compared to the overall budget. And I think, obviously at the end of the day, it's a matter of being able to afford to do programs like that do provide expanded opportunities. I do think that the educational enrichment that the kids would receive overall will far outstrip any of the costs that would be associated with that.
So basically, the idea that we have these 2.5 month summer vacations doesn't really make much sense.
No, not really. And I do understand that, some people really do have a nostalgic feel for, summers and kids being able to have that time off and breaks. And I am fully in support of families being able to, go on vacations, have breaks. Students do need downtime. But I do think that, in terms of our calendar overall, we need to really take a close look at it, reorganize the calendar perhaps a little bit so that when students do have breaks, they have absolute clear academic breaks where there's nothing kind of hanging over their head. And quite frankly, right now, the way our school calendars are structured, that just doesn't happen during the course of the school year, right? So many breaks are often used as times, particularly for older kids, to catch up on larger assignments or other work projects that they may have, as opposed to saying, hey, this is the end of the term. You have nothing for the next week or two. Go enjoy yourself, spend some family time. That just, quite frankly, doesn't happen right now.
Interesting.
Yeah,
And the benefit
think
of that.
about, think about the Thanksgiving break. It's a good 4-day break. It's a fantastic time of year. It's often when families will get together. Older siblings may be coming in from college. But from an academic perspective, you're kind of coming off of midterms, you're coming into a short period before you're going into Christmas break. And then, at least in the high school, you'd have finals, afterwards. And so it's not really a clear break. Whereas if you were on a trimester system, you could structure your trimester system so that just before Thanksgiving, that term ended. Thanksgiving is actually a real break for kids. They have nothing hanging over their heads. You can give them an extended time period. Gives families the opportunity to travel to perhaps more distant relatives and enjoy that holiday.
Interesting. Okay. I hadn't heard that before, but it actually makes a lot of sense. That's an interesting. No, we like bold ideas. We like discussing bold ideas. So bring those forward when it comes to schedule or flexibility. It'd be interesting to have that conversation as well. Now, right now, some of the conversations we're having have to do with things like not CRT so much, but we could talk about that, but also masks in school. Have we handled, as a town, those discussions and those decisions appropriately?
Well, with respect to CRT, and I think the superintendent has been very, very clear about this, CRT is not taught in the school system. And so that's, I think, a little bit of a red herring when people throw out that buzzword. And to be clear, to my understanding, absolutely just not taught. I think with respect to the masks, it's a challenging topic. People feel very, very strongly on both sides, with respect to that issue. We've had a number of instances where, parents have come to our meetings and they're advocating very strongly for their parents regarding that issue. I think at the end of the day, we are somewhat constrained by what the health authorities tell us we have to do in terms of those mandates. And so there's a limit to what we're able to do, but we're always here to, listen to parents, to hear what their concerns are. And, by law, we have to take those into account, and we do listen.
Talk to me about the process, rule, what have you, that Board of Ed members typically don't answer parent questions or public questions at meetings. It's been brought up for a long time. It seemed to have come from CABE a few years back. Talk to me about that rule. Should that rule exist? Should it be modified? Is it appropriate for meetings?
The answer to that is yes and no. There needs to be a forum and a time and a place when the board is able to have dialogue with parents. I think that's extremely important. There is also, however, instances where the board needs to be able to get business done, and being able to come up with the right balance, I think, is important. I would suggest to you that the balance that exists there now is starting to move in the right direction. We're not quite there. As you know, Tim Rayner, who was on your program before, has been a strong advocate of ensuring that there is dialogue, or at least the opportunity for dialogue between parents and board members. And I applaud him for those efforts in helping to move us in that direction. And I think you'll see more movement with greater dialogue as we move forward, and while striking the balance of us having the opportunity and time to get other business that we have to attend to done.
Okay, so the most popular topic among parents and among residents is the superintendent. I know you were a sitting member of the board, so you have to be a little careful. I know tonight his contract is on the agenda. We don't know what questions about the contract are on the agenda. That's not been listed, but there is an executive session. But I will ask you to give us, as a candidate now, your analysis of the job. He's been there for quite a while now. Your analysis of the job that he has done to date, and then separately, your analysis of the job he's done through the pandemic.
Well, with respect to my analysis of the job he's done today, like many parents who have had kids in the school system, I kind of see what the end result is. I see how the school system interacted with my kids in particular, and how they benefited. And from that perspective, I have to give Hamlet high marks. He's made sure that we've hired good teachers. The school system has been organized in terms of its curriculum, in terms of moving kids forward. And my two older kids, in particular, my son's still at the high school. Both of them have had a great experience at the Brantford school system, and we've been really, really, really happy with that. In terms of the pandemic, I know there's a lot of debate as to how the superintendent handled the issues that came out of the pandemic. But I will say this: the school system stayed open. We had no mass closures last year, and I think that was really super important. And that was one of the goals I know that Hamlet had put out there, and he seems to have followed through on. I think perhaps towards the end of last year, not so much, and this really isn't the superintendent, but I think the board, and me, myself included, we should have done a better job in terms of listening to parents, what their concerns were, and where things were moving in terms of the country, and also with respect to the pandemic. But that's kind of Monday morning quarterbacking the whole situation. Hindsight's always 20/20. But we learn through these experiences, and I think the board learned, and I certainly did myself.
So when you say you learned from it, did you feel that, the most common complaint about Hamlet Hernandez is his lack of communication? And when it comes to dealing with teachers often feel the word bully is used often. And when it comes to parents, that he doesn't get back to them or ignores them or just talks down to them. One, do you believe that's true? And two, have you seen any level of improvement in that regard?
I've heard that criticism of Hamlet. It's one that is the one that's most oft repeated. I personally have not witnessed that, and I've not experienced that. But I come from a different place in terms of I'm obviously a little bit older. My kids are older, but I've not experienced that. I think in terms of kind of general overall communication and getting back to parents and things like that, I think some of that also needs to be put a little bit into context. You do have to remember that Hamlet has a lot of responsibilities, and he has the obligation for overseeing a school system that has, I think, somewhere on the neighborhood of 850 employees or thereabouts. It's a $60 million a year budget. And, so he is in charge of running a fairly large organization. And so I think, in terms of kind of the individual contacts, I think we need to take that in mind and kind of, bear that out. Certainly in terms of dealing with specific issues with respect to kids, it's always kind of the parent's best opportunity is to talk to the child's teacher. If they're not receiving appropriate responses there, then bring it up into the building level and talk to the principals, right? Because they're the administrators who are overseeing that. And obviously, the central office, whether it's the superintendent or someone else there, that's kind of the last last line as to where parents should be going. So hopefully parents who are getting frustrated are at least, going through that line.
But Peter, I mean, if I was being devil's advocate here, on one hand, you talk about wanting to change. We're not having good plans for the school system. We're not setting a good direction overall. We have to create more of update our overall plan. But then you're saying Hamlet so far has done a fairly good job. Where do those jive? Like, what am I missing here? What should Hamlet be working on?
Yeah, so part of that's timing, Steve, right? So the 5-year plan, I think, is probably got stale during the beginning part of the COVID time period. I think it's probably unrealistic for the board. And it's really the board's obligation to develop the plan, not Hamlet's. For the board to have been dealing with issues, surrounding the pandemic, and then to also at the same time undertake, it's a Herculean effort to develop, a long-range plan. I think what you will see is now that much of the COVID stuff has gotten, resolved, or at least is being able to be managed, you will see the development of that plan, but that's going to come after the election.
And what would be in that plan that would make you happy? Like, what's not in the plan now, or what has not been fulfilled in past plans that you want to see in new plans?
Well, I certainly think, making sure that we address every child's needs is important. One thing that has not been in past plans that I think needs to be in a current plan is, again, specific ascertainable goals that have measurable markers against which we can measure success or not. Often people will develop these long-range plans and have these lofty ideas and these broad-based statements. I'm not that kind of a guy. I want to see very specific, again, achievable goals that are measurable. And that's a project that the board has to undertake. Should I be fortunate enough to be reelected in November? That's something I will definitely be pushing for the board to achieve.
So, an example of that, what would be one or two of the achievable goals you would aim for?
So, one goal that we do have that we have achieved is, by way of example, a goal towards class size. And so, if your goal is to have a class size of 20 or less, and an adult to child ratio of, say, 1 to 10, that's something that we are pretty close to meeting in most instances. That's just one kind of concrete example. Another concrete example could be a specific STEM program in terms of having a set number of STEM classes and ensuring that there is broad-based participation in those classes.
Okay, so the goals would be specific to curriculum, like have a foreign language program, have financial literacy programs, have things of that nature.
Absolutely, it would be curriculum directed. It would also be facility directed in terms of the facilities that we have, making sure our facilities are up to date and safe for the kids. Certainly, one thing that COVID has drawn a highlight on is air quality within our schools. Making sure that the air quality is good for all the kids. Make sure the air quality studies are being done on a timely basis.
Okay. Interesting. A couple interesting points that you've made that are worth talking about going forward. But for the purposes of this election, this is you were last elected. How long ago were you on the Board of Ed?
10 years ago, I think. Okay. A little bit longer, about 11 or 12 years ago, actually.
But you weren't there when Hamlet was hired.
No, I wasn't there when Hamlet was hired.
Okay. So give us your 2-minute pitch. Why should Peter Berdon be elected to the Board of Education?
So if you're looking for somebody that is going to make data-driven decisions, someone that's going to hold the administration accountable to the goals and objectives that the Board of Education has established, then go ahead, vote for me, because that's what I'm going to do. And that's what I've done before in the past. And I think my history bears that out.
Okay. I'm be honest with you, you were probably the first person who was overall positive about Hamlet. When it comes to the chairman, John Prinz, if you were to be reelected, do you see a change happening there?
That's the inner workings of the board, right? And I think the election's going to have a large impact as to whether or not John will continue on as chairman or not.
Okay, so you're part of that election.
That's right. We got 5 people, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is an unusual election where you have 5 people. A majority of the board is going to overturn in this election, perhaps, right? And so you're going to end up with 5 new individuals that are going to be making decisions, for the board. For the most part, those are going to be 5 people who do not have a long-running relationship with John Prinz, with the exception of, I did serve on the board with John, however many years or so ago it was, but nobody else, I don't think, has. And so there'll be a complete new majority there.
Okay, so as someone who has served with him in the past and knows him maybe more than the other 4, you're the only one on the podcast right now, so you're the only person I can ask this. Would you, election will happen after an election on that chairman, would you choose a new chairman?
Yeah, I don't want to commit on that one way or another, Steve. That's just something that wouldn't be fair to John or to any of the other candidates who might seek that position at this particular time. So I'm going to have to defer on that question for right now.
Okay. I'm not going to ask you about would you extend the Hamlet's contract, because that may come up during this period, and it's on the agenda tonight. That said, would you support putting off that vote until after the election?
That's a good question, Steve. And I look at it from 2 perspectives. One perspective is the current sitting board, has the history, they have the institutional knowledge, they know Hamlet, and they are in a very good position to make that vote. Excuse me. The flip side of it is if I was a candidate who was not currently a sitting board member and I become elected in November, I would be pretty disappointed in having that kind of vote taken so close to an election and basically stripping me of one of the essential duties that I have, which is to oversee the superintendent. There's really kind of 3 super important things that we do. One is the budget, the other is policy, and then the third is oversee the budget. And to have a third of your kind of area of influence taken away so close to an election just doesn't feel right to me. And so, I think you probably kind of gather where I'm leaning towards based upon those comments.
All right. No, and I'm not going to ask you for specifics. I don't want to take away your ability to vote on anything during this term. If you publicly make a statement, it may impact that. So I don't want that to happen, but I appreciate where you're coming from on that. I will say that I personally have appreciated being a lawyer. You typically have a well thought out, reasoned, I can't say I agree with everything you said, but a thought out, reasoned approach to things. And I appreciate that. I think that's an asset and has been in the past to the board. So I'll say this. Thank you for serving.
Thank you.
Thank you for putting your name on a ballot. And it's not an easy thing to do. And I wish you well the rest of the election process.
Thank you. And thank you, Steve, for having me on your program. Really appreciate it. And your program is a great service to the community, allowing folks to get out there and talk directly to a large number of people. So thank you for hosting this.
I appreciate that, Peter. If we need to, we can call you back on before the election.
Absolutely, anytime, either before or even after the election, hopefully.
All right, we'll do that as well. Okay, Peter, thanks a lot.
Okay, Steve, see you. Bye-bye.
Okay, so interesting. It's nice to actually get some ideas. We're talking so much about the job that Hamlet has done, Prinz has done, the role of the Board of Education, to actually get this idea of changing the schedule actually makes a lot of sense. And there's a lot of talk about that nationally. Are we on this, farmer schedule where people have off for the summer, where that's not really an issue anymore? So interesting things to bring up there. He does, remember, he's a lawyer, so he's going to give you both sides of the fence. He may not come out definitively and say yes or no on some things, and that could be good or bad depending on where you stand. I'm just looking over some of the answers that he gave here. So from an interviewee standpoint, sometimes that's frustrating. We want some specific answers, but some he can't. We understand that. I do think it's interesting so far on the board and those that we've interviewed, we have a very wide variety of backgrounds, from people who are teachers in different school districts, from people who are professional business people, and then we have people who are attorneys. And the job of a Board of Ed member is to look at variety of different things. It is, yes, education issues, but it's also business issues. It's also budgets, and so it's also personnel. And so I actually like the fact that we have interviewed such a wide variety of people so far for this board. And it seems to me, we've interviewed people that if all of these members were to get on, we would have a very diverse, very productive board. That's not going to happen. We're going to have to pick at some point, but we'll do that in a few weeks. Okay, that being said, that'll wrap us up for today. I appreciate all of you joining us. We will be on tomorrow. I'm aiming to be on tomorrow. I can't guarantee it, but aiming to. We have a lot of questions about the town side. I want to try to get to. A lot of questions have come in about the tax collector, the election overall, Costco. I think I did get a lot of positive emails after yesterday. Listen, let me just make this clear when we're talking about issues. I like talking about actual issues. I don't care what candidates do in their personal lives. I don't care who they're married to, sleep with, their kid. These are not things that matter to me, what their hobbies are. I care about their public statements and things they've put forward to influence an election or a vote. I care about the job they've done. When it comes to Tom Brockett or Jamie Cosgrove, I judge them based on their public statements and the job they've done. We are a little disadvantaged because Cosgrove doesn't put out a lot. I've never seen a hit piece on an opposition person in an election. That's not me saying that. I'm not defending Cosgrove here. I'm saying for all we have attacks from Brockett on Cosgrove. We've had attacks from Linda Mallow 4 years ago on Cosgrove. We had attacks from Andy Campbell on Cosgrove. I've never seen an attack from Cosgrove to somebody else. So when it's saying, wow, you're only looking at one side, it's the only side being presented. I have one guy who's in office who has never attacked his opponent. I've never seen a mailer against his opponent. I've never seen a social media post bashing his opponent. So I think that's a good thing. But from a journalist standpoint, from a media standpoint, it takes away, this feeling of being imbalanced because I'm analyzing things that Brockett is saying, but there's nothing to say. I ran into this problem with covering past Scanlon issues. He wasn't really going after his opponent. Opponent was going after him, but he was remaining positive and talking about his accomplishments. So the coverage can look skewed. Yes, I've endorsed Jamie Cosgrove. Yes, the job he's done is excellent. I think the vast majority of town agrees with me. The last 4 elections support that the vast majority of town agrees with me. The facts are there. That said, I still have an obligation to analyze statements made by candidates, especially publicly. So I don't know what Tom Brockett says personally in a conversation, but if they post something to their campaign Facebook page and their social media pages, it's public. We have to analyze that. That's our job. That's what we do. And so yesterday, in going over the issue with the tax collector, the only reason we're covering that is because it's involving her job. I'm not going to talk about her personal involvement. Her involvement with Black Lives Matter is commendable. That's not what we're talking about from a political standpoint. We're talking about the job she's doing and her qualifications to do the job. And on this podcast, we will always keep it that way. I'm never going to talk about someone's personal life. I'm not going to talk about what they do outside of their elected position. Even when mistakes are made, drinking or what have you, we're going to look at that very delicately and probably say, let it go. If you want to vote on that, so be it. But that's not what we care about. On this podcast, we care about issues and those issues that affect other people's lives. Yes, there are some embarrassing things that can happen. People make mistakes. We can handle those with a little bit of empathy, understanding that we've all made mistakes. But is this person qualified for a job? And especially when that job impacts the value of your homes, your quality of life, taxes, how you raise your children, where you raise your children. Those are serious things. I'm not going to get lost in personal vendettas, personal statements, personal lives. I want to know what they're doing professionally in their professional capacity that's going to impact us. And so I try to keep it to those topics. So that includes comments here, but also comments on Brantford 7 on the podcast. We're not pushing conspiracy theories or personal attacks on people. If we have an issue with something publicly stated by an elected official, we'll address that. That's what we'll talk about. That's the role of this podcast. If you want more than that, we're not TMZ. We're not going to do that. Okay, that's my TED Talk for today. My goal is to be back tomorrow. If I'm not back tomorrow, We will definitely be having a special one on Friday because Marie Watson will be our guest at that point, and we're still scheduling the rest for next week. So Marie Watson, a candidate for Board of Ed, her on Friday, potentially tomorrow. And until I see you, I hope you all have a great night and enjoy this amazing weather. Have a good one.